we're missing a word for in English. There'll be a wonderful, gigantic long German word for it, but in English, about how to behave well in a team. You know, we need to put aside our selfish impulses and wants and subsume those for helping make our colleagues successful and ultimately the team successful.
I would propose that the word is teamcraft.
Teamcraft. Love it. Love it.
Today, we're joined by Dave Winsborough. Dave is a New Zealand-based organisational psychologist, author and entrepreneur. Originally working as a clinician with a master's degree in psychology, Dave became fascinated by team behaviour and has written numerous research papers and articles on the subject. Having left practice, he went on to found and chair New Zealand's largest occupational psychology consulting firm, later joining Hogan Assessments, a leading US leadership assessment provider, as VP of Innovation. Not one to sit on his laurels, Dave has recently co-founded Deeper Signals, a modern psychometric assessment tool for teams and coaches, and Button Psychology. Dave is also the author of one of my favourite books on teams, Fusion, The Psychology of Teams. Here's today's episode.
I think that organisations, that leaders are too easily in love with the concept of a team, that we will be, quote, a team. So I've heard CEOs say, "Oh, it's one team. Our organisation is one team," and I admire the sentiment, but it's just meaningless, And I think, to be fair, lots of people in organisations, understand it to be just bullshit that comes from corporate leaders, fairly often. More specifically, I think. Again, in organizations, people go, well, let's put a team on that when they have a particular problem, or they organize people around the concept of, well, we have X team or Y team, without really thinking through or following the most basic precept, which I think is, form follows function. Where you have a bunch of people working in proximity, all doing slightly different things, a call center, for example, might be an example, or probably, you'd know more than me, Mark, but in some software projects where people are coding fairly independently, it doesn't require what we look for, which is interdependence. That is, I can't finish my job without input from you, or someone can't do their work without input from both of us. And so, for me, that is the simplest and easiest way of thinking about the difference between a group and a team. I think in the book I use the example of, because I think people often think of team more in the social sense. So, a group of people who are getting together to my book, I think I talked about knit socks for soldiers on the front line, or something. It's great that they're together. They've got the same, they've got the same kind of goal. They want to knit socks, but they don't need each other. They're there for company. That's fabulous, but that's a group. That is not a team.
It sounds like you're talking about the kind of team zeitgeist that's taken hold of a lot of organizational discourse, I would say, recently. One of the things I would frame it like, teams in organizations are sort of symbolically ubiquitous but substantively absent. They're everywhere. And you said it's a social thing. I think that's a really interesting point. It's like, it's actually almost a device to generate an atmosphere, but there's not a great deal that sits beneath the surface.
I think your point is completely right. That it is more the construct. So it is ubiquitous in name, but not substantively, I think, is exactly the point. It parallels for me one of the other things that just drives me absolute batshit crazy, which is managers always reaching for sporting analogies. And yes, you can have teams and organizations. No, they're not quite the same as a sports team. Sports teams, the time frame is fundamentally different. If you have a short-lived team, maybe some of those analogies apply. But we roll easily from concept to like a concept like a sports team into an organization without really thinking through, how does that apply? How does it really honestly apply? Or how do we make this sort of thing work? I think we look for them as wonderful examples that we would like to see in organizations, but the reality is that I think partly because humans are humans and we are cooperative, and it's sort of fundamental to our psychology, we just don't apply much conscious thought, and there's a lot of unconscious kind of activity around stuff that we just assume everyone's going to work like a team or pass the ball from one to another, or fit your analogy here kind of thing. And it's it's a bit silly.
There's definitely something very powerful in that recognition that as soon as you try to this over demonstrative approach to teams, I think that call center example is a really interesting one, or a sales team where people are very individual and actually a lot of the time not working. There is a shared intentionality, do more sales, but it is often a very individualistic job. And sometimes trying to create teams is an absolute failure when you are artificially trying to stimulate whatever the catalyst for teamwork is, but leave humans alone for long enough with a big goal. This was really the core of what Katzenbach said in The Wisdom of Teams, which is a team is a group of people with a big challenging goal that are mutually held accountable to it. That's it. In that situation, teams just form and without thought and without support, because humans are naturally cooperative, and then we do all of this stuff to try to artificially create them and fail in so many times as managers.
Look, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that we do see where a situation calls for something that someone can't do themselves, especially if, and I know we're going to end up talking about the work of Michael Tomasello later when we talk about shared intentions. But if 3 or 4 people see a car accident occur in front of them, they will coordinate their actions in order to help, and they don't need a manager to tell them what to do or to give them a pep talk, because the need is kind of clear and present, and we couldn't do it by ourselves. So I despair sometimes. What do you do with corporations, man? They everyone reads Harvard Business Review and they all go to the same courses and they all walk out, sounding like managers. That's a little cynical. I shouldn't be quite so cynical.
I like your example of sports teams, because actually kind of referring a bit to one of the things you talk about in your book is, I wonder if when you hear leaders conscripting a sports metaphor to motivate their team, they're sort of conflating two things, which is, it's called a team, good, we want to use the word team, but what they're really referring to is the commitment that fans have towards teams. So they're looking for people to refer to the feeling they have about how powerful it is when you're following a team that you love, and that's what they're looking for, the commitment. Because I think one of the things you're saying with sports teams is, compared to organizations, sports teams have a completely salient goal. You've got to beat the opponent, and the rules of the game determine the purpose of your existence in black and white, without any without any ambiguity, which is not something that can be said for the goals that the organizational teams have to focus on.
I think managers certainly would like to see kind of fan responses, but I think they want to see it from inside the team. They want the level of commitment that you see rugby players put into, smashing their bodies one against another, is the kind of, I want to see you die in the ditch for our software project. And, I understand that that's what they want, but no sane person is look, it's just a software project, it's just a job. And let's not, as you said, conflate the kind of effort and commitment that you see, which isn't to say that you don't see that at work, because I think you can. It's hard to sustain over longer periods of time. It's a 90-minute game. It's like, okay, you can really go hard, but it's a 6-month project. Well, that's different. They're just they're different.
So you mentioned Tomasello, that concept of shared intention. How does that fit into the things that managers and leaders are trying to get to motivate their teams to die in the ditch, so to speak?
One of the things you'll see in any of the team models, is that quite rightly, researchers identify that a shared goal is essential. And we've been talking about, and that goal is something that one or two people just can't do by themselves. You need the inputs from other people. I think what Tomasello's work, he did work with primates and then young human primates with kids. What his work showed was that where 2 or 3 people share the same intention, it could be a goal, it could be a number of goals. Maybe the goal is not well specified, and we have to figure out the goal. That is where some of the magic really begins to turn up. We could turn that into. There's a really simple trick that I think lots of managers could do. Instead of turning up at a team meeting saying, "I've just come back from management, and here's the goal, and here's the time frame and the budget and stuff." Instead of doing that, they could frame it differently. They could frame things as a question and leave the team to kind of engage. If you want to see commitment, you want to see people begin to generate the kind of interactivity that good teams show. Don't give them a complete, easily packaged goal. Leave it kind of vague and fuzzy, and that's when I think we see human beings really begin to kind of cooperate and to figure things out together.
I was actually reading an article yesterday, which I think I shared with Andrew, about fake psychological safety.
Oh, I saw that.
I think it was Ron Carucci writing in HBR, and he said something very, very similar to that, which was, in this situation, he very specifically gave an example of a manager who goes into a room intending to give his team psychological safety by trying to give them the freedom to come up with an answer, but everybody in the room knows that he, in that situation, knows the answer, in this particular example that Carucci gave, and it falling flat because there wasn't. It was really interesting. Yeah, they saw straight through it. It didn't ring true, and it was obvious what he was doing in that situation. And I think it's so interesting to reflect on how those things work in teams, because we talk about psychological safety in teams, and we talk about the importance of goals and how the team is going to come together. And even reflecting on myself, I'm really aware of this difference between with my small team. I'm really aware of either over or under communicating, and it's such a difficult trap to fall into, where I think I trust my team implicitly, but where is the difference where I just give a bad instruction? And what is the difference between me saying this is interesting in passing? Wouldn't it, here's something that I think you might be interested in. I'm sharing this with you because it is it's germane to the work that we do, as opposed to, please, can you do this thing? And I know that even trying to be reflective on teams and communication as I do, that I constantly screw that up and get it wrong, and the instruction isn't clear enough. And we work in this very small team that we have. There's 5 of us working in the team. I try to be clear, and we try to get the team to be clear, but it's really interesting that all of these things are very linked. And part of it is, you gave that example of a car accident. The goal is very obvious. in that situation, or at least the tasks will be disseminated. And probably there's an emergent leader in that situation as well, because I think there's something in that. It's really interesting to reflect on things like teal organizations and the lack of managers, that difference between a leader and a manager. And I've seen lots of people claim that egalitarian, completely equal organizations are good, but humans need leadership and they need tasks to be disseminated. So you have that task interdependence. So there's this thing, I realize I've sort of gone off on a track, but just thinking through what you said, Dave, there are all of these things that are required for a team. What is the goal? What are the independent tasks? How do we distribute them? What responsibility am I going to take? And that feeling that we're all trying to deliver something together. And that point about, to come back to that, sports teams and work, it is really different, because at work, you come into work, and often I see, thinking about a lot of the businesses that I've worked with, not just the teams, the teams often have a complete absence of any strategy whatsoever. There might be a financial goal and somebody talking about revenue and profit, which doesn't mean anybody to the people on the floor. But people are just coming in and working by numbers. They're doing what they did yesterday. They're not inspired to work towards some actual goal.
It goes back to the point that Andrew was making about, how do you sustain kind of interest and engagement and, motivation, which is a loaded term, and do that for years on end. Just putting people in a group and saying you're now a team, and is not going to do it. I mean, it referring to a sports metaphor, calling up, trying to G the group up is, I think I would, in that circumstance, you just got to go back to basics and go, rethink the task. What are we here to do? What are we, rote work is rote work, and it can just be shitty and boring, and just because you're in a team isn't going to change that, make it any better.
There's obviously a relationship between the amount of, I think that's something that I've really taken from your work, Dave, is you think you've got the goal nailed, go back and make sure. You really, you can't overthink making sure you know what your goal is and how you communicate to the team. I think that resonates with what Mark was saying about how clear are we on what our strategy is.
Yeah.
But what you mentioned, years and years there, and it made me think of a sense that I get that you don't like team building days, and you don't like the short-termism that sometimes comes in the package with attention towards teamwork.
It's not that I don't like team building days, because they're fun. And I started with, the drift away from clinical work for me was when I got asked to facilitate a few team building events, and I loved doing things like blindfolding a group and putting them in a paddock with a big long rope, and they had to make a circle, and then they had to make a triangle, and it's quite funny watching them stagger around, and everyone laughed, and or doing things like the classic, you got to cross a river and it's of acid, and you've got this barrel, and all of that team building stuff. The issue that I have with those things, they are fun. Go paintballing. I mean, that's fun too. But the translation of what you do out there blindfolded in a paddock to going back to your call center is close to zero, right? The relationship between the two tasks is, there's just no relationship. So my first issue with that stuff is that I think there's just a lot of marketing hype that is trying to sell companies on the idea that teams will be better. The evidence for that is not terribly good. We do have to have a kind of relationship between what you're doing on a team building day and what you do back in the office. On the other hand, going and having fun together, it is good for social cohesion, maybe. getting drunk together, great, do that. But I mean, just call it what it is. We're going to go and have fun for a day, or we're going to go and drink ourselves silly. Obviously, I'm not advocating that is what you should do. There's one other point about that stuff, though, that really does frustrate me, and that is the idea that a manager thinks this is a good thing for the team, and you get a whole bunch of people who are introverted or just don't want to spend their days socializing with the kind of monkeys that they normally work with, but it's required, it's forced, and you are going to get a paradoxical kind of blowback. It's not going to do wonders for that person's engagement.
I have really mixed feelings about those. I've seen a lot of them done, and I've actually reflected on some of that in some of our previous episodes. We, in one of the teams that I worked with, we actually did the RAF, so the Air Force officer selection, which was a lot of that type of activity. It wasn't quite the river is acid. One of the things, latterly, I have something of an issue with that approach that I see on a lot of those old-fashioned outward-bound executive leadership teams, because there is a heavy amount of unconscious bias in it, which is, you're absolutely right. Some people really don't like going on those things, and I actually would consider myself one of them. Like, being put in that situation, you have to go away, you have to spend 2 or 3 days away from home. For some people, especially extroverts, and we'll come on to personality in a bit. If you're an extrovert, going out, spending time with people is great. If you're an introvert, it's like, why do I now have to spend all my time out of my comfort zone with these people? And there's a big part in there that's the point. But even more so, it's a very physical activity. It is forcing people into with this mythos around it that it's putting people outside of their comfort zone. And I understand it, but it is very artificial and benefits some people more than others. And I think it's very uneven. So like you say, it is fun to stand in the field, but for some people, and I don't think a lot of the existing training like that, it recognizes that enough. There was one good thing though. So to try and be balanced in it, one of the things that I saw come out specifically of the RAF officer selection was it did the best job that I have seen of really making people think consciously. That doesn't mean that it really stuck, but think consciously about followership. And I think there is lots of leadership training, but what was nice about that, as much as I could criticize elements of it, what was nice about it is it really trained people, because it was the same group rotating. It was 5 people with a leader nominated for 5 different tasks.
Right.
And it really proved to them what the difficulty of being the leader if you had bad followers was.
Yeah. If it's incredibly well designed, like that sounds like it was, then I buy it. Where we have thought about the way in which a group functions, that people have a chance to go, this is what it's like to be a leader. This is what it's like to have to provide, a goal, or, what do you do when some people don't seem to get it? I mean, those are real kind of leadership tasks. And for a team, if you have a really, I think very skilled facilitation that helps the team reflect on what happened, we can replay it, we can learn from it. Then yes, that sounds really valuable. What I object to is the kind of, what I call kind of rah-rah team building. It's like, we went whitewater rafting, fabulous, have a good time, no problem with that at all. But let's not really pretend that it's going to translate to what we do back in the office, unless we're all in wetsuits and we're paddling somewhere in the office.
Mark and I have discussed quite a lot on this podcast already, and in our conversations when we're working together, is the acknowledgement of the importance of simple things like eating together. You mentioned, going to the pub is a similar thing, but this concept of just sharing that basic human need.
Yeah, because I think that is exactly what it is. It is, it's touching on that kind of basic human connection, and what better way to do that than, an occasional drink or having lunch. It builds bonds. We get to know each other better, which is useful for teamwork. So, working on social cohesion is perfectly legitimate. It makes good sense to me. It's just, as I said before, I think the idea of somehow doing a one-day thing is going to translate into, magic change on the ground is is just naive at best.
I think one of the things that you're talking about, which it resonates a bit with a little anecdote you give in your book, Infusion, is actually away days. If you take with a pinch of salt how instrumentally beneficial the activities you're going to do will be to your teamwork, but really foreground the fact you're having social contact, you're engaging with each other in a different way out of context. And you talked about contact in the book. You give this anecdote of as a milk powder factory that you worked in.
Oh,
Is this going back a while? And before every shift, everybody made a point of shaking each other's hand.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really nice, it's a small but powerful example of a commitment to contact and a physical symbol of we're in this together. And I think that's that's something that a lot of teams could learn from.
Well, I learned from the shift boss way back then. Things like rituals, things that we do together that help form that identity, because it becomes, one of the things that is desirable, I think, if you want to build a strong team, is to create an identity that's bigger than just me. And things like that can help, that connection with one another. And more than anything else, it was about respect. It was about showing that we're kind of here to help each other, not with words, but we valued shit work. You're working in a milk. The weird thing about working in a milk powder factory is it's really hot. It's very hot, but you have to wear overalls and you have to wear gumboots, Wellington boots, because there's so much milk powder in the air. It gets on your skin and you begin to sweat milk after a while. And it's awful. It's just awful. Like, the smell is spectacular. I've never forgotten it. When you go to put your gumboots on at the next shift, it's like, oh my God. Stepping into a warm bath of yogurt that's been there from the day before.
I want to move on to personality and composition of teams, because I think one of the things that sits very close to the surface in any team is the fragility of, because you talked about that identity, right? But there's a fragility to the integrity of the team climate, isn't there? It's very easy for us as we're just dancing on the head of a pin of millions of years of evolution, that we revert to just taking care of ourselves, looking after our own interests. Talk to us about that fragility and the human condition in teams.
I mean, that's such a lovely word, Andrew. And I think that most in organizations, we're rough with people. It's about the task more than anything. And I think I'd go so far as to say I think organizations are sometimes unthinkingly callous about kind of the way in which we treat people. In teams, for example, we know how easily one person can shift the balance from, we all get on really well, and have a chilling effect, or the opposite. I've seen management teams, leadership teams in organizations who have struggled under one CEO and yet blossomed under, when a new CEO comes in. I can think particularly of time working with IBM. A man called Nick Lambert joined probably in about 2000 or a little before, in New Zealand, running IBM. And Nick's style, which was, he's a very big man and he has a very big personality, but it just gave people hope and engagement and freedom to begin to do things on their own, whereas previously they'd operated under a much more bureaucratic kind of structure. IBM's terribly, terribly bureaucratic, and it was extraordinary to see. I am frustrated always when I look in the literature at the size of the effect size of personality on measures of team performance typically is always very modest or small or sometimes non-existent, and it drives me mad because my belief is that it has a larger effect than we've yet seen in terms of the way we measure these things. And I think it is probably a measurement error. But if you talk to any manager, they take very seriously the idea that any good manager knows that people are different and that different combinations produce, have the power to boost a team's performance, or just make a bunch of unhappy people be forced to work together.
Andrew was talking about that fragility of a team. And I think you said that sometimes we're brutal with people. There is something that I find, and this is particularly around personality. This is one of those, to me, almost shockingly brutal, and unthinking uses of a management approach, or something that is considered best practice, which is around the act of giving feedback, but not just giving performance feedback, but specifically around personality and behavior. And I get very, very concerned when I see the use of things like 360 feedback with people that haven't been trained, but even more brutally, the use of things like Myers-Briggs and Belbin in teams with people that aren't fully cognizant of the power of the tool that they're using. And this isn't specifically to call out, and I know we could get onto it, it's not specifically to call out what is inside MBTI and Belbin, but saying to someone, you are a completer finisher, or you are an INTJ, or you are a red character. It immediately pigeonholes them. And I've seen the negative outcome of those things with people immediately being dispirited. Some people would see it as a great success to be one thing or another, but most people immediately pigeonhole themselves from this feedback that they've given. And I think it does a massive disservice to the individual in that situation. So regardless of whether Myers-Briggs is valid or not, or Belbin is a good tool to use for teams, I'm very concerned about that use of feedback when people think they're being helpful.
All I can do is agree. And one of the exercises, if I'm working with leaders, one of the exercises that I have them do is answer a series of questions that I just call "Do you know?" So, do you know what this person's strengths are? Do you know what their development needs are? It's kind of obvious stuff. And then it's like, do you know what their home circumstances are? Do you know what they're dealing with in their lives? Where do they want to go? What are the sorts of people that, what's the sorts of management styles that bring out the best in them? And I think it's the job of any leader to really be able to answer those questions. The utility of some of those tools is that they give you, I think, they give you the feeling that you know the person. You're an ENTJ, I'm an ISFP, and there's a kind of formula to it. It makes people, like I said, it gives people the illusion that you know someone and this is how you should treat them. But it's, I agree with you. It's just a hideous kind of shortcut. Says a man who produces personality tests for a living. So it is a little complicated for me.
It sounds, though, that what you're saying is the misuse of them is to think that they are, I don't know what the right way to put it is, but it's an algorithm that gives you an indisputable diagnosis and path forward. Where, this podcast called Teamcraft, the tradecraft and witchcraft of teamwork. I would say, your personality testing is part of the tradecraft, but you need to bring in the witchcraft part to apply it successfully.
Yeah.
And maybe more than anything, almost going back to, the original sort of forefathers of this, like Francis Galton. The original concept was about a lexicon, wasn't it? It was about the lexical framework of personality attributes. And what it does more than anything, to my mind, is it gives you a vocabulary to use. It gives you a form of language to access conversations that are very important to the success of a team. You knowing, like you say, the strengths and weaknesses, preferences, circumstances of your team members, and then factoring that into your team composition. It doesn't give you a recipe and a perfect cake every time if you just plug it in mindlessly, but it does give you a means of engaging with something that's really important.
the job of any team leader is to help the team be successful. And in order to help the team be successful, you got to know something about what is going to make the people on the inside of the team function at their best. Fit them to help them understand the tasks that they're going to do best. Think about helping them reflect on the way that they come across to help their colleagues be successful, and help them moderate and mediate some of their ways of being, or aspects of their personality that none of us really want to see, because you're a pain in the ass when you do that. So yes, these tools can help in that, but like you said, it is a starter for 10. It is not the whole story. I always try, the phrase that I use a lot with talking to team leaders is, the map is not the territory. Yes, here's a personality report. That is not the same thing as a real person.
Dave, I'd like to reflect on Deeper Signals. So this is a company that you co-founded. I've used, and actually quite regularly now, used that assessment. And I think the takeaway that I have for it is, so obviously it's a big five, an ocean personality type based tool. But the thing that I took away from it was the incredible sensitivity that it took to giving the feedback. And there were a couple of things particularly that I found very valuable from it. First, that it did such a nice job of not dark side traits, but calling out, I think the core risks in the approach. That what it says is, so as an example, if I reflect on how I was assessed through that, which I think is very fair, it would say that I'm candid and reserved, which have some strength in a team. But in a stressful situation, in a high emotion situation, it's very easy for those things to turn into risks, to turn into negative behaviors. And I think it's very obvious in the way that Deeper Signals approaches personality to see these are several spectra. So it is not just one spectrum that you're on, it's several spectrums that you're on. And obviously they are dynamic and they can change, but those things that can be good and positive become things that are bad.
Yeah.
And I think it does an incredibly sensitive job of reflecting that feedback back to the person that is taking the test. But the other thing is, it frames that in the context of what this means to you as a leader and what this means to you as a team as well. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the work that you did on Deep Signals, because I think it's such a great assessment tool.
It was very kind of you to say that, because we have taken a lot of care to try and position what we're doing as a means to an end, right? It's the point of these things are not ends in themselves. It is why I dislike the MBTI, because I think the MBTI, several things. One, it puts you in a box, and that's just really unhelpful. That just says, well, you aren't going to be X or Y, and that's just not what we know about human psychology. People do vary their behavior. I may be really extroverted and a little insensitive, and speak loudly, and talk over people. But if you put me in a church, in a service, for example, if a funeral, then I will behave. My behavior will be constrained. So just because I have those traits, tendencies, does not mean I will display them all the time. The point about, it goes back to what Andrew was saying, is that, we're trying to give individuals and managers, leaders, tools so that we can get a result, get an end. So here is some information about you. This says that you may not, but mostly we think you will behave in these ways. And then it's like, now what are we going to do about that? Here's some questions to think about. Or, the other thing that we tried very hard with Deeper Signals to do was to give people ways of thinking about a team as an entire unit. So if I have, 8 people, and lo and behold, they're all candid, that has some implications for the way the team is going to perform and show up. Or if there are differences between people, maybe we should spend time, trying to understand what those, what we might call those deep level, kind of diversity actually means, or how it's going to show up for the team. So, yeah, thank you. It is a big 5 test because that is right now the most robust and best validated way of understanding human psychology. And as Andrew alluded to, there's a lexical model. It's derived from the words that people use to describe other people, and that tells us something about the psychology of what happens. To how other people see you show up.
It's going to sound like I'm kind of beating down on MBTI now, or we all are piling in on it. But I think in reference to teamwork, because I think that's one of the things we're talking about here is, well, Dave, you've already mentioned people behave differently in different contexts. Teams operate in contexts, and those contexts are dynamic in themselves. One of the things I think is important when you're thinking about a team configuration is that the members of that team, they have to be able to go from what they understand about themselves and then plug those characteristics into a team dynamic and make the team work. And I think one of the things that can happen when you have this idea of being in a box is that it actually retrenches your attitude towards how you relate to your fellow team members, right? As opposed to going, okay, well, I'm generally introverted, and I'm a bit neurotic about certain things. That means that I need to work hard in situations of high stress to ensure that I don't exacerbate the anxieties or the tensions for the team, as opposed to going, well, I'm neurotic, so you guys just have to leave me alone in a crisis, okay? Which is not good for the team. So I think there's that thing of, does it give you a platform from which to improve how you contribute to that overall entity, or does it actually pull you away from working on that?
So cogently put. I think, again, one of the things that drives me mad about the MBTI, or any any tool that puts you in a role, you're a plant, or it's like, well, now I don't have to worry about doing the other stuff. I'm a plant, therefore, I think creatively, and all that admin stuff, that's not for me, that's someone else. And it's like that just is antithetical to what good teamwork actually is. So, thanks for making that point. It's extremely useful. Part of your job, it's what Mark said before, it's about followership. There's probably, we're missing a word for, in English, there'll be a wonderful, gigantic long German word for it, but in English, about how to behave well in a team. We need to put aside our selfish impulses and wants and subsume those for helping make our colleagues successful and ultimately the team successful.
I would propose that the word is teamcraft.
Teamcraft. Love it. Love it.
As someone that's kind of comes at this from a language point of view, I think that's a really good point, is the linguistic tools that you have to make sense of what's happening have a shaping effect on how you perceive your environment and your relationships. And in the absence of a word that gives you that tool, then you can revert to other more well-established words that maybe move you further away. So what about teams' capacity to reflect on themselves? That's something that I know that you care a lot about as well. And I think it follows on from the conversation we just had, is the ability that a team has to work on itself and reflect on its performance.
So I do a lot of work with senior leadership teams. One of the I think abiding differences, I mean, it comes back to some of the stuff that Tom Seller was saying. If we have a shared intention, we can reflect on how is that going. And if we reflect on how is it going, it has this, this wonderful kind of, it has this refractory effect on, we can alter our behavior. We can begin now to think about the task in different ways. The goal of anyone coaching a team is to have the team able to do that for themselves. So I think it's of the first order. despite slagging off sports teams before, one of the great strengths that they review every game. I know in the software world, we have the equivalent of some work I've done with the Army, after action reviews, or pre-mortems, like when it goes wrong, what might happen, how might things fall out. So those kinds of group shared mental model building, I just, it's a fundamentally important skill. It's, I can't commend it highly enough.
So is that something that you see is a distinctive feature of teams that you would regard as high performing, is that they find a way of making the time? Because I think a lot of teams would say, we don't get the time. And I think the response to that would be, no, you don't make the time. It's not that you don't get it, because investing that time in reflection, adjourning, pre-mortems, post-mortems, however you want to call it, it actually buys you time in the long run through improved team effectiveness.
Yeah, 100%. Of course it does. I get that organisations are busy. I get that everyone's a bit short of staff, or money's tight, and you've got to be highly productive. But thinking more about outputs than inputs, just doing more and doing it faster or doing it for a longer time is not going to get you there. So yeah, 100% reflect, think. Let's see how do we go. Yeah, I think surgery is a really good example. That is not a sporting analogy, but is quite useful. People who repeat the same operation, often with the same crew, really good practice is, and it comes back to, I know we just briefly touched on psychological safety, but it's where Amy Edmondson came up with the whole notion that someone can call out the surgeon and say, when you do that, people die, or we run a risk, or, and the team learning together is what reflection and review is all about.
One thing I'd like to reflect on is the use of how to correctly use personality, awareness of personality in teams. In Deeper Signals, it does a really nice job of talking about where your traits are and how they may impact your behavior in a team. And I was reading an article last night that was authored by Suzanne Bell and others, and I know it's something that Andrew has looked at, and I'm sure you will both know much better than I do. But in the paper, it talked about compositional and compilational factors for teams, specifically around personalities, and almost how some teams will be very strong in certain personality types, and how other teams will actually level personalities. And obviously personality is complex and adaptive, and having personality types where they're all the same in the team or they're balanced against team members leads to very different behaviors. So just quickly, with your expertise, what is the right way for us to think about personality in teamwork?
Let me say, to start with, there are two cases. The first case is you have a team, like, it's the team that turned up, or it's the people who have been assigned to you. And I would say, always play the hand you are dealt. And the use of personality in that, in that circumstance is to understand them better, and to think about the task and the processes that are required. And so if, for example, we have a team of extroverts, but the work that we are doing requires moments of kind of careful thought and reflection, you're going to want to practice some of those skills much more overtly and concretely, rather than just leaving them, let's brainstorm, or let's just throw ideas around. The second case is where you are lucky enough to be able to build a team and maybe select people onto it. And the evidence is clear that there are some having people who are going to be good at the kind of social oil, at smoothing relationships, at pulling people together, is really useful. So in personality terms, we'd say they're highly agreeable. Those kinds of people on a team are really useful. as are people who are well disciplined and thorough. So conscientiousness, the evidence is really clear that those, conscientiousness is a very useful trait on a team. If you need to do a lot of creative work, then obviously people who are high on openness is going to be useful. Beyond that, I think that the idea of using personality tools as a way of just understanding the people and helping them fine tune their behavior and fine tuning processes and systems and things around them is the best use. One caveat: people like me who are tend to be, anxious, fairly highly strung, prone to look on, pay more attention and give more weight to negative news, i.e., people who are neurotic or, in the modern parlance, low on emotional stability. The bad news is that you have a lot of those people on a team. We do know that's not hugely useful. I wouldn't make a mission to Mars because I would be too wearing to be around, for other people to be around me. Yeah, and I don't think a lot of extroverts on a mission to Mars would be a fabulous idea either. It'd just drive everyone absolutely fucking bonkers to be stuck in a tin can for a whole year with someone who can't shut up. So, I still think it's an extremely powerful tool used well.
Where you started that, I absolutely love, because we don't ever in reality, except maybe a mission to Mars, get the opportunity to really carefully attempt to select on personality, and nor should we. So I think that advice that you should play the hand you're dealt. And then there is that real sensitivity back for leaders in the organization to you can use it as a tool to help the team perform, but the idea that you can select on personality is I think really, really dangerous.
Yeah, and I would concur that it's useful, but yeah, I think it's because it's just not the be all and end all. It's about skills as well. Obviously you're going to select on skills.
And Mark mentioned that that paper, Bell et al. 2018, I think we're referring to, and you talked about configuration and compilation. And that's interesting. And I think we need a whole other interview about talking about Mission to Mars. But you talked about the longer interval life of a team and reflecting on that, because team compilation, this is where I think we would do well to educate ourselves on the specifics of the language around our understanding of teamwork, because compilation is about the emergence of a team dynamic over time, and personalities feature heavily in that, and they need to find ways of adjusting and integrating. But thinking of personalities as inputs and you stop there is probably unhelpful to setting up a successful team.
I think you're 100% right. If it's short term, it kind of barely matters. If it's long term, then you should, yes, we should be thinking carefully about that. But of course, it's not just, yes, you have a personality, but you've got a life history as well, and that has a huge impact.
Yeah, we like to finish with a few quick fires, Dave, if that's okay. So 3 questions for you.
Yeah.
The first one is, what is your best team memory?
I think my best team memory is, we alluded to the company that I formed with 3 other people: Tomas Chamorro Premisic, Uri Ort, and Reese Akhtar. Uri, Reese, and I worked together in a WeWork office in Brooklyn. We didn't know each other, and we were in a tiny room, kind of, maybe 3 meters by 4 meters, for the best part of 18 months, and working incredibly closely on projects that were very ill-defined. I'm old, they are young, I'm dumb, they're really quite smart, and one of the 3 of us was incredibly good looking. We bonded so well and worked together so well. It was one of the peak experiences of my life was working with those two guys. If they're listening, they will end up listening to this. I'll deny it in the real world, but working with them was one of the peak experiences of my life. I got married earlier this year, and both those young men were my best men at my wedding. So yeah, went well beyond just effectively working together and thinking together and creating together. Fabulous experience.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
You can see in your face the happiness it brings recalling it. The other side, what are your team red flags?
I think there are two. There's a kind of obvious one, which is, mood, I think, is a really good indicator if people are down or, bummed out or not giving of that kind of not giving of themselves. It's just a big fat red flag. Yes, it could be to do with one individual, but that would be a sign for me. So I think mood, and we shouldn't ignore the fact that leaders' mood is contagious in small groups, right? So, and I think the second thing is, we talked before about working for the good of your colleagues and for the team. So there are, Teamcraft. And I think when people begin to follow their own kind of selfish needs, or put those needs ahead of the group, would be another flag for me that we haven't got something quite right. So yeah, those two things, mood and the behavior of someone beginning to think more selfishly. Teams are not places to think selfishly.
And finally, we give you a chance to share a resource, some book, podcast, anything that you think is a valuable tool to anyone that wanted to look further into teamwork. What would that be?
The book, we were talking before about Michael Tomasello, and his 2009 book called Why We Cooperate was really influential for me. I really enjoyed it and found it very stimulating. And then there's another book which is kind of nothing about teams, or not much, but I think it taught me a lot about emergent systems, and it had a very useful effect on the way that I began to think about dynamics over time in working and coaching teams. And it's by a guy called Douglas Hofstadter, called Gödel, Escher, Bach, about some of the themes that bind, the work of Gödel, Escher, and Bach. It's deep. It's a deep book, and it's an odd book. And so, anyone who's got 700 pages worth of time to get into it, it's absolutely fascinating. Really, really interesting.
Dave, it's been an absolute pleasure and a joy you taking us on a tour through personality and teamwork and your experiences. So thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thanks, guys.
Dave's Pass It On resources were Michael Tomasello's book, Why We Cooperate, and Gödel, Escher, Bach by Douglas Hofstadter. In this episode, you also heard us reference an excellent 2018 paper by Suzanne Bell et al. Called Team Composition and the ABCs of Teamwork. Andrew and I loved reading Dave's own book, Fusion, The Psychology of Teams, which we strongly recommend. And I would also urge anyone interested in the psychology of personality to check out the assessment that Dave co-created, Deeper Signals, at www.deepersignals.com. We hope you enjoyed listening today, and will join us on the next episode of Teamcraft.